This is an excerpt from a series of internet courses on integrating shadows. It is the fifth session in the second level of 3 levels. It presumes some experience with Mondo Zen and a basic understanding of integral theory. If you are confused by the language, it's okay. Just relax and continue watching. You will absorb far more than you realize. Thank you. So, teaching section. Today, with 3 perspectives we're going to explore today. The hidden grammar of language, ethics, and culture. Making the invisible visible. And reclaiming evil. Reclaiming the energy that's been cast into the shadows when we disowned evil. Boy, that's no small task today. So chaos and culture. Chaos and order. Something we can't see protects us from something we don't understand. Something we can't see protects us from something we don't understand. The thing we can't see is culture in its intrapsychic or internal manifestation. In its left quadrant manifestations, it's invisible to us. The thing we do not understand is the chaos that gave rise to the culture. You know, it's the situations of chaos that drives the creation, the natural, organic creation of cultures. If the structure of culture is disrupted, unwittingly chaos returns. We will do anything to defend ourselves against that return, the return of that chaos, that disorder. That was a quote by Jordan Peterson. Language, ethics, and culture. Do you remember learning your first language, the grammatical rules? Do you remember learning the grammatical rules, the deep structure of your cultural belief system? We learn the ethical rules of the family we are raised in, the right way and the wrong way to think, feel, speak, and act as we're learning our language. Have you learned to speak a second language, a third language? You know, this is where Americans are a little problematic. How old were you when you learned the language? Can you see the difference between learning a language very young and at an older age when the ego is more developed? Can you see that the more developed the ego, the less learning is automatic and unconscious, and the more it is deliberate and conscious? Isn't that an interesting thing to notice? As we become aware of other languages and other cultures, and, you know, culture and language, if you've ever studied a second language, you have to learn the culture, the idioms. It's just an amazing experience. Acknowledging deep psychic structures. 2 complementary theories of deep psychic structures that we're going to explore. The theory of instincts and archetypes, what Ken Wilber would call prototypes. And what Ken says is that this term archetypes that was coined by Carl Jung, borrowed from Plato and others. Jung, in Ken's opinion, only talked about and articulated, only pointed to one true archetype, the archetype of self, the wholeness of self. Everything else that he called an archetype, Ken would call a prototype, which means it's evolving. It's an evolving form. It's not an a priori form. So theoretically, these so-called instincts give rise to instinctual patterns of behavior. Theoretically, these so-called archetypes give rise to archetypal images charged with intense emotional energy and feelings of numinosity, of sacredness. No one has ever seen an instinct or an archetype. They're just ideas invented to explain the predictable behaviors and the predictable symbolic images that we see when we systematically study large groups of individuals. They're hypothetical constructs used to explain behaviors that we can observe. It's really important to pause for a moment and really take a look at the way karma is explained in esoteric Buddhism. When I say esoteric Buddhism, I'm specifically referring to Buddhist schools that use the 8 consciousness model of mind. That would be Mahayana Buddhism and Vajrayana Buddhism, second and third turning, and of course, fourth turning. So there's a manifest world out there, and there's a storehouse. Now, where this storehouse is not clear. Jung borrowed this idea of a storehouse, I believe, to coin this term collective unconscious, but he never said the collective unconscious was located in the brain. It could be anywhere. We just don't know where it's located. The DNA structure is another way of talking in modern scientific terms about the storehouse, the genetic memory. So this storehouse has 2 aspects in esoteric Buddhism. The 8th consciousness, the storehouse, is a storehouse of all karma. It also has a seed aspect. So my direct experience of deep meditative mind, of opening to this storehouse, is that there are 2 things that aren't things here. The first thing that's here, that's not a thing, is all the karma of everything that's ever been. And the second thing that's not a thing is all the potentiality of everything that will ever be. All of this is here, now, right here, accessible now in this storehouse. So there's an ancient Chinese verse. A seed gives rise to a deed. A deed perfumes a seed. These 3 factors circle around simultaneously, being cause and effect, from a book, The Vision of Buddhism. So what they're really saying here is all of a sudden, out of the storehouse come conditions that lead to a deed. That deed runs its course, and the karma of that deed returns to the storehouse. Now there's this perfuming that happens. So as the seed takes roots and sprouts in the manifest world, it's perfumed by other things in the manifest world. And then it turns into a deed, an action that runs its course and then returns to the storehouse and is perfumed by other things in the storehouse. So this is kind of like synchronicity and quantum physics. The logical Newtonian thinking mind cannot follow what's happening here. So this is a territory that Buddhism has explored extensively with this cause and effect of karma. Right here, the deeds, perfuming, becoming seeds, being perfumed, becoming deeds. On and on and on, since the beginningless time. So these hypothetical deep psychic structures, like instincts and archetypes, or we'll call them prototypes, they form over very long periods of time. Deeds becoming seeds, becoming deeds, being perfumed, becoming seeds. They form like quartz crystals. This is a cave of crystals in Mexico. These huge crystals are on top of a bed of hot lava. You can't survive without breathing apparatus in this cave. They formed over about 500,000 years. Extreme conditions of water vapor and intense heat formed this magnificent cave of crystals. Now, part of the process is the tension between opposites, this process of polarizing. We have predators. We've had predators for millions and millions and millions and millions of years, and we've had prey. The tension between the predators and the prey, out of this evolved these survival instincts. Then along comes the creation of man and tools and hunting implements. So now we have hunters and we have hunted. And the tension out of this led to all the cave art and so many of the rituals surrounding hunting of Neolithic man. You know, the hunt was so important. Religions formed out of hunting and the hunted. And today we have predators and we have victims. So we'll explore these things a little bit more intensely and closely. So the emergence of the rescuer out of the predators and the victims emerges a rescuer. Isn't that interesting? So this is a quantum leap. And we explored this a little in a previous exercise where most people can they can relate to the rescuer, but they don't see themselves as a predator. And they usually don't see themselves as a victim, but they're perpetually rescuing victims. This is a condition that exists in postmodernity. And it's actually an evolution of consciousness to get these three perspectives in one individual simultaneously is a feat of evolution. This is, I think, the first time it really occurred in large numbers is in postmodernity. Now, for me, in Integral Zen, we're saying that the first stabilization of personality requires a second-tier teal perspective, the ability to at least cognitively be able to see what we're talking about on this course. You would not have stayed in this course if you didn't have some cognitive understanding of what we're talking about here. You would have been bored to tears and would have left. So we can assume that everybody on this course at least has a cognitive understanding of the evolution of consciousness through these different levels of development. Now, the second thing that stabilizes personality is beginning to move into a vantage point of the witness. And this is where the process of Mondo Zen, as well as the process of Big Mind, are so important, because they lead us with language to a direct experience, a whiff of witnessing mind, where there are no opinions, where there are no happiness and sadness to hijack our experience or pollute it. There's just absolute clarity and selfless, unpolluted caring, no agendas. So at least we get a whiff of this. We get a direct experience of this. So with this witness added to the triad of the rescuer, victim, and the perpetrator, we have a stable manifestation of personality. And we have a tetrahedron rather than just a two-dimensional triangle. So let's explore these ideas of scapegoats and sacrificial lambs. There they are, the scapegoat and the sacrificial lamb. So in ancient times, there were actually religious rituals. In the Day of Atonement, in the Talmud, the scapegoat, these are actual goats that were loaded up and burdened with all the sins of the tribe and then abandoned in the desert to die. This is a symbolic ritual that is very powerful and enables people to really become conscious of their sins. If they have to admit their sins and face them in order to load them onto the scapegoat, that's a huge thing that keeps you in relationship to your shadows, to your shortcomings. Without this ritual, it's so easy to just sweep them under the rug. This is the power of such rituals, a ritualistic way to keep us humble and to keep us from becoming narcissistic and self-centered and forgetful of all our shortcomings. Now, sacrificial lambs in ancient times, they're killed in a ritualistic way, a sacrificial blood offering for the well-being of the tribe. So again, this is a ritual process that reminds us of so much of our humanness, and especially the part of our humanness and the part of nature, our impermanence, and the parts of ourselves that we don't really want to look at. Now, in modern times, these scapegoats are really symbolic of a person who is blamed for the wrongdoings, the mistakes, or the faults of others, especially for reasons of expediency. And a classic example is in genocides, like the Holocaust. Hitler was really pushing this idea of the master race. He was using that to motivate the people to do things like invade their neighbors and build up a war machine, puff up that narcissistic pride, that cultural pride in the master race, and use it to further his selfish agenda. And in order to do that, he needed a scapegoat. He needed someone he could blame for all the problems, someone that the whole German race could blame for all the problems. So the master race met the chosen people. Boy, is that a train wreck, symbolically, archetypally. That's an archetypal train wreck just waiting to happen. Who better to project all the shortcomings of the German people onto than the Jews? And the results were just catastrophic, but not that unusual. There are genocides everywhere we look. So, synonyms for scapegoats are whipping boys, fall guys, patsies. So often someone will refuse to be a scapegoat. Find yourself another scapegoat. It's real easy to do. It's so difficult when we're talking collective projections, collective shadows, when a whole race, a whole nation turns psychotic. Much more difficult to deal with. So this sacrificial lamb in modern times, this becomes a little more complicated. On one hand, the sacrificial lamb symbolizes a helpless victim. The lamb has not got any skin in the game. It's no desire to be sacrificed. It's an ignorant, helpless victim, innocent victim. On the other hand, there's a more or less willing victim, implying self-sacrifice for the common good. This has a little bit more moral character and requires consciousness of wanting to do something selflessly. This is also the deep symbolism that often lies at the heart of a more narcissistic martyr complex. That, oh, woe is me, I'm the martyr. and quite complicated psychologically. So at this deep archetypal level, it becomes visible in art. Here's a beautiful artistic depiction of a crucifix that I saw at Crichton University, which is a Jesuit university where we hold retreats. This is a magnificent, very large crucifix. It's a work of art. There's the Savior. Oops. There's the Savior. And if you look in at any part of the Savior's body, what you see is the Savior is made up of all these skulls. Just everywhere. The body it's the Savior of all souls. What a beautiful symbolic depiction of this symbol of Christianity, the Savior of all souls. So if we're looking at the whole psyche, I wanted to bring forth that image that I used before. We have the conscious mind. We have mental consciousness in this circle. Then we have the 5 sense consciousnesses: visual, sound, smell, taste, and touch consciousness. And then we have the primary selves, the masks that we wear, the personas, which are pretty much in the conscious mind. And then we have the disowned selves. Opposite each persona is a disowned self, or what Ken Wilber calls a false self, a lie that we tell ourselves. And this is all the personal unconscious, according to Jung's topology. And then we have these instinctual, emotional patterns and the archetypal images that arise out of these hypothetical, emotional, instinctual, and archetypal structures of the collective unconscious. And when I do Mondo Zen, what I find is when there's an ego contraction, when there's a pattern of contracting, a habitual problem of contraction, when I drill down into it from clear, deep heart mind, from meditative mind, what becomes visible is a disowned emotion. At the heart of this complex is a disowned emotion. And if we look deeper, or if we allow our dreams to inform us, we can find that there's an archetypal image that will inform us in our dreams. This is the realm that Jung worked in. Or if we use active imagination, we'll find that this image has symbolic image is trying to inform us of something. And if we really dig down beneath the emotional level into the negative emotion, the klesha, or what we like to call the clamshell kleshas, what we'd rather die than face, or what we'd rather kill than let go of, then we find this klesha, this survival, and we're getting real close to the realm of instincts. So this is just a methodology and a map of the mind to talk about these things, the things that are invisible that we're trying to make visible. So all of these symbols are like icebergs. They have meaning where at the surface, above the surface of the water, we can see part of the iceberg. And this is what a sign signifies. You know, a dog is a dog. And if we go down beneath consciousness into the depths, where there's much more to the iceberg than meets the eye. And this is where these deeper symbolic meanings become known. That means so much more than we can see. They affect us in ways that we aren't even aware of. So this relative rescuer, there's a relationship between this relative rescuer on top of the surface and the ultimate symbol of the Savior of souls that lies beneath the surface where we can't see. in this deep archetypal water. So another way of looking at this is the model of the 8 consciousnesses. The 6 sense consciousnesses, the 5 senses as well as the mind, and the liking and disliking. All of this is operational above the surface. And then beneath the surface, all of these sense objects, images, sounds, tastes, touches, all of that, including thoughts and emotions, they arise and they disappear. They leave no trace. Where this sense of self comes from is this deeper instinctual and archetypal layer. This is deeper where the roots of self lie. This is this permanence of self that we feel, this continuity of self, that in this esoteric Buddhist map of the mind is the 7th consciousness, the klesha consciousness. And beneath that is the 8th consciousness, the storehouse of all karma, and the potentiality, the seeds of everything that will ever be, the seeds of all potentiality. So that's in the storehouse. Now the Tibetans say that when we start getting into the supernatural realm of spirits, of deities, of gods and goddesses, what we're actually seeing is the 6th consciousness, our sensation and our thinking and feeling, looking over the bridge of the 7th consciousness, where the continuity and feeling of permanence of self resides, looking over the bridge of the 7th consciousness into the storehouse of the 8th consciousness. This is the whole Sambhogakaya, the supernatural realm of deities. Really interesting stuff here. So take this relative victim and notice that it aligns and resonates with this deep archetypal level, field of the absolute eternal Savior. Notice there's a resonance that makes this victim so powerful and difficult to dislodge. Someone who is totally identified with the victim, it's one of the most difficult things in the world to dislodge this. Very, very deep structure. So now let's go back to this problem of evil. Remember, we live in a postmodern culture where we've really gotten rid of this notion of evil. We don't talk about evil. We have a loving God. There is no devil. Our loving God is what we really work with. And it wasn't so long ago that the problem of evil was dealt with in religion. This Archangel Michael cast out Lucifer out of heaven and condemned him to hell. Lucifer couldn't be killed. He was an angel. He was immortal. He couldn't be killed. The best they could do was banish him to the underworld. This is really casting the devil, evil, into the shadows. Can't get rid of it. All we can do is pretend it's not there. But it is there. Pictured by Raphael. And one of the quotes out of our Zen Hollowbone Sutra book, from the Gospel of Thomas, from the Dead Sea Scrolls, Jesus said, if you bring forth what is inside you, what you bring forth will save you. If you don't bring forth what is inside you, what you don't bring forth will destroy you. So if you bring forth this archetypal level, this hideous beast that breathes in the shadowy depths of our haunted souls, what you bring forth can save you. if you don't bring this forth, if you continue to suppress it and disown it and cast it into shadows, that shadow is still alive and quite active. And what you don't bring forth will destroy you. And this is even more true in the realm of the collective shadows that we're exploring with this course. If we continue to ignore and suppress all evil, or ignorance, as we like to say in Buddhism, what we don't bring forth will destroy us. And as Einstein said, I don't know what weapons the Fourth World War will be fought with. I mean, the Third World War will be fought with. We don't really know what kind of weapons are out there now. But he said, I do know what weapons the Fourth World War will be fought with. It will be fought with sticks and stones. Harrowing thought from Einstein. Shadow projections and scapegoats. So it's one thing to consciously find a scapegoat. It's another thing to unconsciously project your own shadow onto someone. And this has even more serious implications if it's a collective shadow, and many people share it. If you want to know what a collective shadow feels like, have you ever gone to a sports game, like a soccer game in Europe, or a football game in America, and notice the fervor of the crowd? This is what Jung called participation mystique, the mob violence, the emotion that's contagious and just spreads through a crowd. When we're dealing with shadow projections, collective shadow projections, this is the emotional content we can identify. And just like with Mondo Zen, we can let that emotion, that identifiable participation mystique, the mob emotion, we can let that inform us that there is a collective shadow active, and we can begin to look for it. So we still attribute to the other fellow all the evil and inferior qualities that we do not like to recognize in ourselves, and therefore have to criticize and attack him. When all that has happened, is that an inferior soul has immigrated from one person to another? The world is still full of God, I never can say that. Bêtes noir. What it means is it's another word for scapegoat. And scapegoats. Just as it formerly teemed with witches and werewolves. This is a quote from Carl Jung. So here's a picture of a scapegoat that's real popular. We love to take potshots at this scapegoat. Guess who it is? Oops, it's a secret. Can you feel the collective, the feeling of abhorrence, disgust? Oh my God. Just look at how that fills the liberal news. As Wilbur points out so eloquently in Trump in a Postmodern World, there's so much about ourselves we could learn by really examining what we're projecting onto Trump. And it's not that he's not like that. It's not like we can't just go down the list and say, he's like this, he's like this, he's like this, he's like this. There are ample hooks for all our projections. He is like that. It's just true. But the fact that we have such emotional fervor should inform us that we're projecting our shit onto him without owning it. And this is the lesson that we're not learning in postmodernity. Yes, we should do something about this man. He's dangerous. But no, we should really first, before we throw stones at his glass house, we should clean our own windows so we can see those very qualities we're projecting onto the scapegoat in ourselves. All of the things that postmodern egalitarian relativism disowns in themselves and abhors, all the allergies they're projecting onto Trump. And if they would just take a look at it in exactly the same way that we look at the benefit of people that bug us with individual shadows. Remember all those exercises we did? The benefit of people that bug us? Well, this is the benefit of someone who collectively bugs us, who the liberal media has an agenda for. And yes, he's got all those qualities. It's true. But why does it bother us so much? What are we disowning and putting onto him and sending out in the desert, hoping it will die? It won't die. It's still here and it's still active. And we can't get rid of it. The only way out is to face it and own it and integrate it into who we are. So this center of gravity from second tier, from a teal view that has a meta view of the evolution of consciousness, and from a state vantage point, which only comes reliably with a meditative practice, cultivating this selfless witnessing mind, getting less and less of me and my narcissistic self, my self-centered self. The combination of these two things is a stabilized form of personality, the first stabilized form. And if we look at the rescuer and we look at the deeper archetypal level of the savior of all souls, we'll get a feel for how powerful this image of the rescuer, this identification with this archetypal, prototypal image of the savior of all souls. And then if we get a look at the victim, we're trying to rescue all these victims. Why is that? Why are we so obsessed with rescuing these victims? Well, is it possible that we're trying to rescue the victim in ourselves, the undeveloped self that we haven't developed, that's still a helpless victim? And the perpetrator, if we're a rescuer, we're at war with the perpetrators. We're trying to save the victim from these nasty perpetrators. They're the problem. They're the scapegoat. So here is the sacrificial lamb, the victim, and the scapegoat is a perpetrator. And the only way you can see this is by cultivating, developing your meditative practice to cultivate your ability to remain present in meditative mind and bear witness from naked, unpolluted awareness, unpolluted by all your opinions and your prejudices and your addictions, unpolluted by all your allergies and the things you disgustingly want to push away. Unpolluted mind, awareness, witnessing mind. So there's so much more to this, and it can't be seen. It's invisible until you have a second tier meta view that includes the evolution of consciousness and a cultivation, mainly through meditation, of a selfless witness. Shadows, addictions, allergies, and what drives them. Identifying the gross and subtle objects of our individual and cultural addictions. There's no way out but through. We must face and identify make visible what is invisible, individually and collectively. We must identify the gross and subtle objects of our individual and cultural allergies. All the things that we push away and sweep under the rug and despise, all the parts of ourselves that we project out and make scapegoats of, we must own them. We must make the invisible visible to work through it. And then do the deeper work, identifying the instinctual, klesha level, the emotional, the negative emotions, and the archetypal forces that underlie and drive our individual and cultural allergies and addictions. Integrating Zen, integrating our shadows. With a second tier teal view from a selfless witnessing vantage point. This is what we must do. We must integrate our shadows from a stable manifestation of personality. So we have a lot of work to do to bring our cognitive line of development into teal, into a meta view that sees the evolution of consciousness and doesn't get stuck and pigeonholed in a prison of first tier prejudices and preferences. And then we must cultivate meditative mind. We must practice. We must cultivate this, get rid of everything that pollutes this bodhicitta, this absolute clarity and selfless caring. This is the vantage point that's stable. This is where fearlessness shows up. This is a wonderful example of some of the work that occurs during this course. Thank you, Hannah, for your willingness and courage to share this. Thank you for being open, honest, vulnerable, and real. In this deep working session, the rescuer, the victim, and the perpetrator were all merged together in confusion. The life force, the vital energy was stuck. By using integral voice dialogue, I was able to lead Hannah into a gentle process of self-liberation. Notice how, as the energy begins flowing, she begins naturally transmitting absolute clarity and deep selfless compassion, what in Zen we call bodhicitta.
Well, I've been stuck for a long time in the realm of action, and knowing that, like, I want to. I've been working as a psychotherapist, and doing one-on-one healing work, and and I sit in witness a lot in this way, and there's something about myself as the therapist, or as the way I've been doing it, just I want to allow that to die, and I want to move into what's next. Whatever, I don't know I have sense of what's next, and it's something about being able to be with a larger field, and have a bigger flow of transmission.
So you're throwing out a whole lot of words.
Okay.
And that's wonderful. But if we really are looking at the world from the point of view of integral semiotics, we need to go slowly. We need to make sure that these big words that we all just assume we're communicating and we understand each other, that we really are communicating. So transmission, that's a very technical term to a Zen master. I'm curious, what do you mean when you say transmission?
What I mean is being the state that I'm hoping to witness in the world around me.
What is being transmitted?
What is being transmitted is insight and understanding and clarity.
So you would have done fine until you added the understanding. That's not transmission.
Mm-hmm.
That's interpretation. That's sixth consciousness, adding interpretation onto the insight and the clarity.
Okay.
From a Zen master's perspective. And it must be spontaneous. It must be absolutely naked awareness, clearly transmitted, this presence, with no prejudice or preference, with no addictions or allergies or anything that drives them. This is what transmission is.
Yeah.
Naked awareness. So psychotherapy, I love what Jumpo said that just triggered everybody, all the Zen students and all the psychotherapists, which we get a lot of psychotherapists in Hollow Bones and Integral Zen, more in Integral Zen. He said, the only problem with psychotherapy and with Zen is they don't work. And, you know, of course, he's a Renzai Zen master. He likes to be controversial. He likes to challenge. That's what he's doing. And I would say that in fairness, it's not that they don't work. It's that they don't work very well, either one of them. And it's because, as Einstein said, religion or science without religion is blind. And religion without science is lame. So this is pointing to what James talks about. You know, if you just have insight and you don't do anything with it, there's no action, you're lame. So what? So what if you're awake? But if you have all this knowledge, but you have no insight, you're just blind and ignorant. And you're going to stumble in the darkness and cause all kinds of problems, especially with all these powerful technologies. So I love Hal Stone in the voice dialogue process. He always, with psychotherapists, including himself, he starts by asking to speak to the voice of the psychological knower. Isn't that a great exercise?
Yes.
Let me speak to the voice of the psychological knower.
Okay.
Who am I speaking to?
The voice of the psychological knower.
Wow, good to see you there. Boy, you must have spent a lot of time reading books and studying.
Not really. No. A little bit. A little bit of time.
How much?
I don't know. Yeah, maybe my whole life.
Did you feel that shift? Did you feel that beautiful vulnerability that just popped out? The honesty, open, honest, and vulnerable. Wasn't it gorgeous? Maybe my whole life. Me too. I'm guilty as well. See all these books here? This is Jung's collected works. I read them all before I was 24. And that's just the Jung. That's not getting into the Gestalt and all the other stuff. So, tell us about you.
I'm looking for answers.
Of course you are.
I want to solve all the problems of the human condition, and of course,
Yes.
myself, primarily.
So you're glowing, you're transmitting. Bodhicitta. That transmission starts with open, honest, and vulnerable, I've noticed.
Yeah.
So that's good to know. Yeah. So the psychological knower is vulnerable. How delightful.
Mm.
The psychological knower is transmitting. I tell you, this is unusual in my experience. I bow to that. So, you mentioned, did I hear you say you were stuck, or did I invent that?
Yeah, I spoke that. I've been stuck in being in action, and I've created a lot of chaos in my personal life such that I don't feel effective
Uh-huh.
to be able to be in larger service.
Yeah. So you're kind of stuck in the prison of knowledge, sounds like. Is that possible?
Possible. I guess I'd want to know more about what you mean by knowledge and stuck in the prison of knowledge. What is that?
Well, that's where the psychological knower lives. She lives in knowledge, in the prison of knowledge.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah.
The prison of yeah, and like there's a lot, there's insight, easy access to insight, but insight alone is either lame or blind. I
No,
guess
insight's never blind, but it
okay.
can't be lame.
Lame, right,
Insight
lame.
is never blind.
So yeah, I
Knowledge
have
is always
lameness.
blind.
I'm lame.
Yeah.
I'm lame.
So what that informs me,
Mm-hmm.
just the fact that you have a feeling of being lame,
Mm-hmm.
that informs me that you need to deepen your insight. Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can feel a contraction around my heart right now.
Oh, tell us about that. What do you know about that?
Um, what I know is that there's a voice connected to it that says I'm not good enough.
So a psychological knower has to be perfect, don't they?
Yes. That and this relates with what you taught today, which is that I have been the scapegoat and the what was the other one? The sacrificial. I've been both of those recently. So there's a contraction there.
So let's let go of the psychological knower and
Okay.
let me talk to the voice of the scapegoat.
Mm-hmm.
Who am I speaking to?
Voice of scapegoat.
And what's your job?
My job is to remain submerged, to remain isolated and submerged in the unconscious.
Okay, so what you're describing is not a scapegoat. That's interesting. What you're describing is a sacrificial lamb, a victim.
Yeah, that one. Mm-hmm.
Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's shift and let's talk to the voice that was speaking. So let's put aside the scapegoat because it was the victim that really wanted to speak,
Yeah.
the sacrificial lamb.
Yeah.
So let's invite her to speak. Please, let's speak to the voice of the lamb, of the victim. Who am I speaking to?
The lamb.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what could you tell us about you?
Um, It didn't feel like a choice.
Mm-hmm.
It fed into the lameness.
And what is the it? Help me understand what the it is you're seeing.
The it was the experience of what I interpreted as assault,
Mm-hmm.
which if I had been deeper in my practice, I could have received as a Zen slap.
Yeah. Let's slow down and let's make room here because you've been assaulted. You've
Yeah.
been victimized. So
Mm-hmm.
let's make room. Let's go slowly because this is tender territory. So let's make lots of space where you have room to maneuver and you're not cornered. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you're the voice of the victim.
Yeah.
What is your job as the voice of the victim?
My job is to be seen and heard and validated that what I experienced was not okay.
Okay, now that sounds more like the voice of the rescuer. Isn't that interesting?
Yes, because they're all connected. They're all one voice.
They're merged here. They're not. It's not that they're connected. They're merged.
They're merged.
What we're trying to do with greatest care is separate, unmerge them to where we can see them as distinct. There's a rescuer that has one job, and there's a victim that has another job. And if we can just really make what's invisible right now visible, then things can heal. Healing can progress.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to do it very gingerly, very tenderly, with great respect and care, and tiny little steps. So how big a step can we take? Can we take this big or this big? I've got a yardstick right here. How big a step can I take? 1 inch? 3 inches? 6 inches? How big a step should we take?
Well, yeah, it depends. I mean, I'm ready to take the flying leap, but that doesn't necessarily mean.
So I hear what you want, but
Yeah.
let's stop and make room, and let's just really open our heart and look, because
Okay.
what is the appropriate size of step for us to take?
Yeah. Well, I can't exactly answer an inch because that's an abstract concept, but I'm ready to take a step, and I'm definitely in very clear awareness of the need for deeper insight.
Okay. So that's what we're doing is we're cultivating deeper insight, which will enable us to unmerge these two things that are merged together.
Yeah.
That's what will help us here is insight.
Right.
So I'm using language to guide you into an insight by just asking gentle questions.
Right. I'm curious about what the victim need is. Like, what did you ask that question? What is the victim here to want for you, or what was that question again?
The question is, if I'm speaking to the victim, what is your job?
My job as a victim.
I am a victim. My job is.
I am a victim. My job is to be a victim.
Oh my God, what an insight. So how does that feel to know what your job is?
It feels good. It feels liberating.
It does, doesn't it?
Yes.
You thought your job was different. You thought you weren't doing a very good job, and you're doing a great job.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay. So can I speak to another voice now that we've cleared that up?
Yeah.
Is there anything else you need to say as the voice of the victim?
No, nothing more.
Nothing more. Okay.
It's not boring. It's not boring.
It's not boring, is it?
Boring, no.
Boy, you are an incredible teacher when you're doing your job, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So who are you teaching?
Teaching myself.
Mm-hmm. And which self?
At first there was this like, oh, I'm teaching witness, but no. No. So I saw that right away. Like, no, witness is doesn't need teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm teaching myself, victim self, about being victim.
Mm-hmm.
And there's in this moment of clarity, there's just compassion opening up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Compassion. You're transmitting compassion. Isn't that interesting? You think that might be helpful?
I do.
I don't want to interrupt the process, but if we ask everybody how they feel about it, we'll do that later. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This moment when you just realize your job is just to be a victim, and you have such compassion for yourself and for all victims,
Mm-hmm.
for the archetype of the eternal victim. You have
Mm-hmm.
great compassion now and absolute clarity.
Mm-hmm.
This is bodhicitta. Yes. So let me speak to the voice of the rescuer.
Okay.
Who am I speaking to?
Voice of the rescuer.
Oh, what's your job?
My job is to rescue.
Yeah. And what happens when you try to rescue the victim?
I go even deeper into shadow.
Say more.
Oh, it's a very seductive trip
Oh.
to be a rescuer, because it feels good to be a hero and to
So this is, just notice how it makes you feel happy in a narcissistic way to be
right.
a rescuer.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? So let's drop into the clarity and let's look at what happens to the victim when you're the rescuer. What's the impact of your narcissistic rescuing on this victim?
Wow. Yeah, the victim is becomes stuck because it has to remain victim for the rescuer to have its place.
Isn't that another insight? I bow to your insights. You're perpetuating the eternal victim.
Right.
As a rescuer, as a savior of all souls.
No wonder I've been so disgusted.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, and what does that do to compassion and clarity?
Violence.
It's violent.
Violent.
You've been violent toward you've been victimizing your victim by being a rescuer.
Right.
Oh. Do you feel the caring and the compassion?
I do.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, I'm still in a little bit of like disgust, though. That's not caring and compassion, that's reaction.
okay, so that means there's shadow here.
Shadow.
Yeah. So if you could see where that's arising from, what would you see? What is driving that disgust? What disgusts you?
I get, you know what, when it's like, I guess it really does come from deep caring, because it's like, it's just like enough like of the lie, enough of like living in this lie. So it's like the disgust is probably, I think underneath that is like a commitment to waking up and growing up. So I think that's.
So do you feel the energy that's there?
I do.
There is potential energy out of this evil, this ignorance,
Right.
that you've been perpetuating violence. You have been the perpetrator of violence. And do you feel the disgust at how could I do that? And I want to just shift a little knob here. And I want to speak to another voice. You can go back and clean that up later. You've got all the tools you need.
Okay.
Let me speak to the voice of responsibility.
Okay.
Who am I speaking to?
The voice of responsibility.
What's your job?
Right. My job is to be responsible.
How does that feel?
Feels good.
And how will you know if you're being responsible? If you're doing your job?
There will be clarity. There will be this.
And what is this?
Quiet.
Clarity and quiet are synonymous. In the stillness, there's clarity. So if you always start with bodhicitta, if you start with absolute stillness and clarity, and the first thing that arises in this silence is the caring. Remember the caring? The selfless caring, not the agenda of caring.
Yeah.
And who can inform you whether you are here or not? Who can teach you?
My heart.
Yes, of course. When the foot feels the ground, the heart knows the way. But what voice did we speak to that would be a wonderful teacher to let you know whether you have compassion or not?
Responsibility.
Well, the responsibility is the action, but
Right.
there's
Okay.
one voice that can really teach you about the caring.
Why is it? Yeah, I was just here, and what voice?
So notice how fragile
Right. Yeah.
this is. It's because there's so many things at so many levels going on. The energy's flowing, it's moving,
Yeah.
actions are happening. This is what you've been going through. This is what you described at the beginning of our call. It's perfect. So I'm going to lead you. Is that all right if I rob you a little bit? And if I lead you with language a little?
Please do.
Let me speak again to the voice of the victim.
Yeah, that's who I was thinking. Yes.
Who am I speaking to?
Victim.
By you owning your victim, you open the door to compassion.
Yeah.
And I mean real compassion, not this idiot compassion that everybody parades around and pretends to be. This is compassion for all victims without even thinking you can rescue them.
Right.
Bear witness to victims like you'd bear witness to someone who's dying. There's nothing you can do to rescue them. They're dying.
This is it.
This is it.
This is it.
This is it. So remember this and cultivate this and bow to your teacher, the victim within you, and let it break your heart open.
Yes.
Let all the victims break your heart open.
Right.
And whenever it doesn't break your heart open, get very still and find the clarity. And then the selfless caring. Find the clarity and then the victim. And don't rescue anybody.
I got it.
Wonderful. That's just gorgeous work. Gorgeous work. Okay. Deepest gratitude and tremendous respect for all the work you've done that enabled you to do this work for the benefit of all beings today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Swaha. Anything else you'd like to say, Hana? Let's speak to Hana and integrate all this.
I just want to say wow. Just wow. And I have my call on.
You have your work cut out for you.
My work cut out for me. And
Stabilize the insights you just had.
Yeah. And I'm just in awe of Junpo's choice in my Dharma name. Kanan, which means she who hears the sorrows of the world.
Oh.
Or she who listens to the sorrows of the world, something like that. Yeah.
Isn't that perfect?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that perfect? Out of not knowing, we get our names. The rafts we need to swim to open our hearts.
Mm-hmm.
Swaha.
Uh-huh.
Deepest gratitude to Jumpo for the gift he's given us all.
Mm-hmm. And thank you, Doshin, for the for the way you transmit and what you've brought together here. There's I don't want to pollute it with words.
Wonderful. Yeah, silence is perfect. I get it. You're transmitting it. This is a magnificent example of what is possible when we find a student who has both the psychological knowledge of a therapist as well as the deep insight of a Mondo Zen practitioner. Then, if we add the gentle guidance of an integral Roshi, great liberation can manifest and be transmitted right before our eyes. Thank you, Hana. We can't We have no control over what happens to us. Very little. The only control we have is whether we unconsciously, habitually react, and that usually is from shadow, or whether we consciously, compassionately respond with clarity and compassion. It makes all the difference in the world. Swaha.